Hello, Small Cotton Creations here. I'm going to be teaching you today how to make the element sleeves. I made a really small version here for this video. This pattern is available in my Etsy and Shopify shop, so if you would like to get the PDF version to follow along, please feel free to do so. This pattern is designed in such a way that you can make it any size, so you can make the top part as wide as needed to fit over your head and shoulders, and the sleeves can be made to any length. It is a little bit of a flare sleeve, or the sleeves can be also super boxy, so you have a lot of options with this sleeve. And you can use any weight yarn and any weight or any size of hook. Just make sure that the size of hook that you use matches your weight of yarn, so it's an easy workup. But otherwise, please enjoy, and make sure to let me know what you think of the video at the end, if it was helpful or not. Okay, to start, we are going to be making an FDC chain. If you do not like making foundation double crochets, you can start with a chain. Just make sure to chain loosely. If you don't know how to make an FDC chain, I will show you how to do it here. We are going to be making one that is long enough that it will not only slip over your head, but wrap around your shoulders a little bit too, because this sleeves design is designed to kind of fall off of your shoulders. So to make a foundation double crochet, we're going to start by chaining 2 or 3, whatever you like. And you're going to yarn over and insert your hook into the first chain made and pull up a loop. And then what you're going to do is go ahead and grab that yarn and pull through just one loop on hook. This makes a little chain at the bottom here. That's what we're going to work into for our next foundation double crochet. But to finish this one, you're going to yarn over and pull through 2 twice, just like a normal double crochet. So that's one foundation double crochet. We're going to do that again. We're going to yarn over, insert into the bottom of that previous foundation double crochet, that same little extra chain we had made, pull up a loop, and then again we're going to yarn over and just pull through one loop on hook. And that makes our little chain for the bottom of our foundation double crochet. It's what we'll work into next. And then we're going to yarn over, pull through 2 twice, and that is another foundation double crochet. So I'll do a couple more here, but again, you're going to make this foundation double crochet chain long enough that it not only slides over your head, but around your shoulders some, and it should be a factor of 10 stitches, okay? So 100, 110, 120, etc. would be good. Here's a couple more so you can see. Just like so. All right, I'm going to show you guys how to connect our foundation double crochet here in a second. All right, once you've finished your foundation double crochet chain, or your chain, if you did a chain, you can slip stitch to connect them and then DC around your chain. But if you did a foundation double crochet, make sure that your piece is lying flat like it would around your shoulders, and you're going to go ahead and start your next foundation double crochet. Now remember, this should be a factor of 10 for all of your foundation double crochets. So if you already did, like, say 140 stitches, undo your last one, because your last stitch will be the one that you use to connect your foundation double crochets. So start your foundation double crochet by yarning over and inserting and pulling up a loop in the bottom of the previous one. And then you're going to insert into the bottom of the first foundation double crochet you made. You're going to pull up a loop, and you pull that loop through just one loop on your hook. Then you're going to yarn over and pull through 2 twice, like so, and then insert into the top of the first foundation double crochet that you made and slip stitch into that, and that will round out your work. So moving on to the next row, we are going to chain 6 loosely. So super loose. Okay. If you have trouble crocheting that loosely, you can chain like say 8 or something else. But you can check that you made sure you chained loosely enough here in a second. We're going to skip 4 stitches. So not the one we slip stitched into, we won't count that. 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to slip stitch into the next stitch. And how we can check to make sure we chained loosely enough, we should be able to pull our foundation double crochet chain, and this 6 stitches shouldn't become tighter than the foundation double crochet chain. Otherwise your foundation will get kind of floppy and your chain will be tighter. So we want to make sure this is looser. You maybe want to check it after the first round as well. So we're going to continue on chaining 6, skipping 4 stitches, slip stitching into the next stitch, and we're going to do that all the way around. And once we get back to where we started on the last 4 stitches, I will show you what we will do. Alright, once you have made your way around and you only have 4 stitches left here, what you're going to do is chain 3, and you're going to do a treble crochet into the same stitch that you had slip stitched into at the end of the previous round. So treble crochet, yarn over twice, insert into that stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3 times. And the height of that treble crochet should be about the height of the chain 3. So moving on to the next row, we are going to chain 7 now, again loosely. And then we're going to slip stitch into the next chain space. And we're going to continue this all the way around. Like that. We're going to continue, and then once you reach the last chain space, I will show you how to finish off row 3. Alright, once you reach the last chain space, what you're going to do to finish this row is chain 4 and do kind of a loose treble crochet into the top of the treble crochet from the previous row. We want it to be loose because we want it to be the same height as our chain 4, so that way our little diamond we made doesn't look lopsided. So now we can repeat this last row as many times as you would like for your coverage in the chest area of your sleeves. But once you're ready to start your sleeves, what we're going to do is you can go ahead and put it on if you would like, or you can guess and see if it fits right. But what we're going to do is we're going to lay our work across our chest and put a stitch marker where the front of your armpit area, so say this is your shoulder area here, where your arm kind of is going through down this way. We're going to put a stitch marker where the front of our armpit is and the back of our armpit, something like this. And we're going to count how many chain spaces are in that space, including the ones we put stitch markers into. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 we have here. I'm going to probably do one less because I think that'll be nice. So 8 total chain spaces is what we need for our arm, going like around the outside of our arm. So that's how many chain spaces we're going to work into for the first part of our sleeve start. So what we're going to do is, starting where we left off, we are going to chain 7 again. And slip stitch into the next chain space. We're going to do this. Let me make sure. Seven more times. So it's a total of 8. Well, I'll double check, but there should be the 8 chain spaces worked into from the previous row. So chain 7, slip stitch into the next chain space. Let me make sure there's 8 chain spaces I worked into. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I need one more. There. All right. And then just to double check, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we should have one less chain spaces than were worked into in the previous row for this row. All right, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna chain 7, and then we're gonna turn our work, and we're gonna work back into that same chain space that we just made. And then we're gonna work 7 chains again across each chain space that was just made in the previous row. And then once we reach that last chain space, what we're gonna do is we're gonna chain 4, and then we're gonna do a treble crochet into the top of the treble crochet from the previous, not the previous row, but 2 rows down. It's kind of where we started that chain in the previous row. Remember to make it a little bit loose so that way it's the same height as your chain 4. And now to count our chain spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There should be 8 chain spaces after. So you worked into 8 chain spaces, you made 7 chain spaces, and now we're back to 8 chain spaces again. So now we're gonna turn again and chain 7. And slip stitch into the next chain space. We're going to do this all the way across. For 7 total chain spaces we're going to make again. But on the last one, we're gonna slip stitch into the 4th chain. That way our work doesn't slide about on that side, like that. So there should be 7 chain spaces you just made in that last row. And now, or however many you had made originally. And now we can repeat the last 2 rows as many times as needed until we have kind of reached where we want to connect the underarm portion of our sleeve. So I'm going to do it one more time here. Again, we're going to chain 7, turn our work, slip stitch into the same chain we had just made in the previous row, and then chain 7 and work all the way across. And then once we reach our last chain space that we worked into, we're going to chain 4 and then do a treble crochet into the top of the treble crochet below. That's 2 rows below, like that. And we can turn our work and chain 7 and slip stitch into the next chain space. I'm going to do this all the way across. So we should be alternating between our original chain space counts, 8, and then the one that, the chain spaces that we had worked into was 8. So then we made 7 chain spaces, and we're going back and forth between 8 chain spaces and 7 chain spaces. And then once we reach that last chain space, remember in the second repeat row, we are going to slip stitch into the 4th stitch. Like that. All right, so continue to repeat the last 2 rows as many times as you would like. And once you're ready to do the underarm connection of our sleeve, what we're gonna do is we are going to do row 3, so the second row, make sure that that's the last one that we had done. So we're gonna, make sure that you do row 2 and row 3 repeated for this section, and the last one is row 3. And then we are going to make a chain, a long chain that's going to go underneath our arm. So you can compare this measurement to your upper arm measurement. You might only need to make a short chain. You might need to make a long chain to reach your upper arm measurement, but you want it to be as close as possible. Maybe a couple inches bigger, but it will be a wide sleeve if you make it too big. So that chain we are going to make needs to be, a multiple of our stitch counts from each chain space that we had just made. So it was chain 7s, and we are going to do a multiple. We're going to do a multiple of 5. Excuse me. A multiple of 5 minus 1 chain. So 9, 14, 20, etc., or 9, 14, 19, etc. is a multiple of 5 minus 1 chain. So I'm going to do 9 chains. And then I'm going to kind of fold my work in half because I'm going to be working in the round now around our sleeve. And I'm going to slip stitch into the top of the treble here from my last repeat of row 2. Like this. That should make a nice round. Now what we are going to do is we're going to turn our work to work back across that chain we just made. So we'll chain 7. We're going to skip four stitches and slip stitch into the next stitch. We're going to do that until we only have 4 stitches left, which I'm already there. So I'm going to chain 4 now. If you aren't there yet, do a chain 7, skip 4 stitches, slip stitch into the next stitch. Once you only have 4 stitches left, you'll chain 4 and treble into the same stitch that you had started your long chain from. And that will make your chain spaces to round out your sleeve. Now we're going to turn our work again, and we're only going to work from the outside of our work now, so there won't be any more turning when it comes to this sleeve. Now let's go ahead, we're going to count our chain spaces that we have. I have 9 chain spaces. So, and I apologize, I forgot about this. It has to be an even number. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back on my frog all the way back to my long chain. And I'm going to do one less multiple of 5. So I'm going to do 4 stitches. And that way my chain count is an even number. It has to be an even number around my sleeve. So let's count our chain spaces again. So now I have 8 total chain spaces, and that's how many I need to make sure that the next rows go smoothly. All right, so now we are going to be working our work from the outside only. And we're gonna go ahead and start with a chain 7. We're going to do a treble crochet into the top of the next chain space over. And then we're going to chain 7 again. And we're going to slip stitch into the next chain space. We're going to repeat this all the way around. Treble into the next chain space, chain 7, slip stitch into the next chain space. Once you've worked around and you worked the treble crochet into your last chain space available, you're going to chain 7 and slip stitch into the top of the treble crochet at the end of the previous row, just like that. And then for row 3, after we connected, so that was row 2, now we're on row 3 of after our underarm connection point, we are going to chain 3, and we can either skip 3 chains or just DC. So we can either skip 3 chains and DC into the 4th chain, or we can just DC into that chain space. I'm going to do that. And then we're going to chain 3 and add a treble crochet into the top of the treble crochet. We're going to chain 2, add another treble crochet into the same stitch. Now again, we'll chain 3, either skip 3 chains and work into the 4th chain, or just work into the chain space, a DC, and then chain 3 and slip stitch into either the same space from 2 rows down or into the slip stitch from the previous row. And then again, we're going to repeat that same pattern. So chain 3, slip or DC into either the 4th chain or the chain space, chain 3, treble crochet into the top of the treble crochet, chain 2, treble crochet into the same stitch, chain 3, again either skip 3 chains or DC into the chain space, chain 3, and then slip stitch in either the chain space from 2 rows down or the slip stitch from the previous row. We're going to repeat that all the way around. All right, once you do your last DC before you're back to where you started this round, instead of doing a final chain 3 and slip stitch, we are going to just work a treble crochet into the last chain that you had started this row from. Like so. Moving on to row 4, we are going to chain 2. We're going to skip the slip stitch, and the first chain space, and we're going to slip stitch into the top of this first DC here from the previous row. And then we're going to chain 2. We're going to DC into the chain space. And then we're going to chain 2, DC into the chain space between the 2 trebles, chain 1, treble crochet into the same chain space, chain 1, and DC into that same chain space again. Then we are going to chain 2, DC into the next chain space after the treble, and then we will chain 2, slip stitch into the top of our DC here, and then again we'll chain 2, skip our chain space, slip stitch, chain space, and slip stitch into the top of our DC in the next repeat. So we'll continue to repeat that around. We'll chain 2, DC into chain space, chain 2, DC into the space between the 2 treble crochets, chain 1, treble crochet into the same chain space, chain 1, DC into the same chain space, chain 2, DC into the next chain space, chain 2, slip stitch into the top of the DC, chain 2, skip the chain, slip stitch and chain, and then we're going to slip stitch into the top of the next DC. So we'll continue to repeat that all the way around. Once you've reached back to where you started, you're going to do your final chain 2 and slip stitch into the top of the treble crochet from the previous row. So it should look something like this. For row 5, how we're going to start is we're going to start by slip stitching into that first chain space, chain 2 space we made here, and then we are going to chain 2, which counts as a DC. We'll chain 2 again, skip the slip stitch, and chain 2 and the DC. So sorry, skip the slip stitch, the chain 2 and the DC, and then we'll DC into the next chain space after the DC. Chain 2, and then we are going to skip the DC in the next chain space, and working into the top of the treble crochet, we're going to add a DC plus chain 1, a treble crochet into the same stitch, another chain 1, and a DC into that same stitch. And then we will chain 2. We'll skip the chain space in the DC, and we will work a DC into the next stitch. And then we will chain 2 and DC into, so we'll skip the DC, the chain space, slip stitch, we'll DC into this chain space here. Like so. So to repeat that, we're going to chain 2, skip the slip stitch, chain space, DC, DC into the next chain space, chain 2, working to the top of the treble, we'll work a DC plus chain 1, a treble, another chain 1, and then a DC all into the top of the treble. Then we'll chain 2, skip the chain space in DC, work a DC into the next chain space, chain 2, then we'll skip the DC, chain space, and slip stitch, and add a DC into the next chain space. So we're going to repeat that all the way around. And once we get back to kind of where we started, we'll do our final chain 2. And then we're going to slip stitch into the second chain of the first chain 4 that we had made. So we chained 2 for our first DC. Like so. And now for row 6, we will start by skipping our first chain space, and we're going to DC into the top of our first DC. And then we'll add 2 DCs in the chain space. We'll DC into the top of the next DC. And we'll add 1 DC in the next chain space. And then, so that's a total of 5 DCs, we're going to add a half treble, so that's where we yarn over twice, into the top of our treble, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 3. That's our half treble. We'll do a treble crochet into the same stitch. Oop. And then we'll do a half treble crochet into the same stitch. And then we will work 5 DCs back down the other side, 1 DC in the next chain space, 1 into the top of the DC, 2 DCs into the next chain space, 1 into the next DC. And then we're going to add a slip stitch into the top of the next DC, skip the chain space. And then again, to repeat, we'll start by working DC into the top of the next DC after the chain space. Two DCs into the next chain space. DC into the top of the next DC, a DC in the next chain space. And we'll work a half treble, a treble, and a half treble into the top of the treble from the previous row, and then DC into the chain space, DC into the top of the DC, 2 DC in the next chain space, DC into the top of the DC, and then skip the chain space and slip stitch into the next DC. And we're going to repeat this all the way around. Once you've worked your last DC into the last DC made in the previous round, you can go ahead and slip stitch into that same chain that you started from on this row. And then for row 7, we're going to start with a chain 2, which counts as our first DC, and then we will chain 2 again. We're gonna skip 2 DC, and we're gonna work a DC into the next stitch. Then we will chain 2, and this time we're gonna skip 3 DC, well, 3 stitches, 2 DC and the half treble crochet. Then working into the top of the treble crochet, we're gonna add a DC, and then we'll chain 2, add a treble into the same stitch, chain 2, add a DC into the same stitch, and then we will chain 2 and skip 3 stitches. Oh, did I do that right? Yeah, 1, 2, 3. So we'll skip 3 stitches, and we'll do a DC into the top of the next DC. Then we should have 2 DC left, so we'll chain 2, and then we're going to work a DC into the slip stitch here. And then to repeat, we're going to chain 2, skip 2 DC, DC into the next DC, chain 2, skip 3 stitches, add a DC into the top of the treble, chain 2, add a treble into the same stitch, chain 2, add a DC into the same stitch, chain 2, skip 3 stitches, DC into the next stitch, chain 2, and then we're going to add a DC into the slip stitch after the next 2 stitches. We're going to repeat that all the way around. All right, once we are back to where we started, we'll do our final chain 2, and then we will slip stitch into the second chain from our original chain 4, which will be the top of that DC. And then for row 8, this will be our repeat row. So you'll want to do this row as many times as needed until you are about 2 inches from the length of the sleeves that you desire. So to start, we will do chain 2, and that will be our first DC. We'll chain 2 again, and we'll work a DC into the top of the DC here. We'll chain 2, DC into the top of the next DC, chain 2, we'll DC into the top of the treble crochet, chain 2, DC into the top of the next DC, chain 2, DC into the top of the next DC, chain 2, and then work a DC on top of the DC that's in the slip stitch. We'll repeat that all the way around. Chain 2, DC into the top of the DC, chain 2, DC to the top of the next DC, chain 2, DC into the top of the treble crochet, chain 2, DC into the top of the next DC, chain 2, DC into the top of the next DC, chain 2. We'll continue to repeat this all the way around. All right, and then to finish off the round, we will chain 2 our last time and slip stitch into the second chain from the previous, or from where we started. And again, repeat this row as many times as needed to reach about 2 inches short of the length that you desire. I'm going to go ahead and move on. I want these to be a little bit more of a short sleeve. So after you're done repeating that row as many times as needed, this is what you will do for the first row of kind of the sleeve finish portion of the pattern. So we are going to start by skipping our chain 2 and DC, and we will add 2 DCs into the next chain space. And then we will add a DC into the top of the DC, 2 DC into the next chain space for a total of 5 DC. And then we're going to have a half treble into the top of the next DC, as well as a treble crochet, and then another half treble. And then we will work 5 DCs down the other side, 2 in the next chain space, 1 DC into the top of the next DC, 2 DC into the next chain space, and then we will skip the DC and chain space and slip stitch into the top of the next DC. So to repeat, we'll skip the chain space, DC, and work 2 DC into the next chain space, 1 DC into the top of the DC, 2 DC into the next chain space for a total of 5 DC. And then into the next DC, we'll work a half treble, a treble crochet, and another half treble. And then another 5 DC down the other side. So 2 DC into the next chain space, 1 into the top of the DC, 2 into the next chain space. And then we'll skip the DC and chain space and slip stitch into the next DC. And we'll repeat that all the way around. And after you work your final DC for this round, we'll skip our final DC and chain space and slip stitch into the same chain we started this row from. All right, so moving on to our second row of the finishing part of our sleeves, we're gonna chain 2, skip 2 DC, and then we're gonna DC into the next DC, chain 1, and DC into the same stitch. Then we'll chain 2, skip 1 DC, and DC into the next stitch. Then we will chain 2, skip 1 stitch, which is our half treble crochet, and then we'll DC into the top of our treble crochet. We will chain 1 and add a treble crochet into the same stitch, chain 1 and DC into the same stitch again. Then again we will chain 2 and skip just 1 stitch, DC into the next stitch, chain 2, skip 1 DC, and we'll add a DC plus chain 1 and a DC into the next stitch, and then we will chain 2, skip the last 2 DC, and slip stitch into the top of the slip stitch from the previous row. To repeat that, we will chain 2, skip 2 DC, DC into the next DC, chain 1, DC into the same stitch, chain 2, skip 1 DC, DC into the next stitch, chain 2, skip 1 stitch, and into the top of the treble at the point we will add a DC, chain 1, add a treble into the same stitch, chain 1, DC into the same stitch, and then down the other side we will chain 2, skip 1 stitch, and DC into the next stitch, chain 2, skip 1 stitch, DC into the next stitch, chain 1, DC into the same stitch, chain 2, and then skip the last 2 DC and slip stitch into the top of the slip stitch there from the previous row, and we will repeat that all the way around. All right, now we will do our final chain 2 and slip stitch into the same stitch we started that row from, and then we are on to our final row. So we are going to skip our first chain space and work a DC into the top of that first DC from the previous row. We will DC into the chain space just once, and then add a DC into the top of the next DC. Then we will add 2 DCs into the next chain space, a DC into the top of the DC, 2 DCs into the next chain space, DC into the top of the next DC, DC into the chain space, and that should be a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 total DCs. And then to the top of the treble crochet, what we are going to do is start with a DC, and then we are going to do a puff stitch picket. So if you haven't done a puff stitch before, make sure to pay attention. We're going to start by chaining 3. We're going to be working into the top of the DC we just made. So we're going to yarn over, insert our hook into the top of the DC we had just made, and pull up a long loop the height of our chain 3. We're going to do that 2 more times. So yarn over, insert into the top of the DC, pull up a long loop, yarn over, insert, pull up a long loop. You can do it 1 more time or more if you would like, depending on how thick of a puff stitch you want, but I'm just going to do it 3 times. There should be 7 loops on your hook. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 7 loops, yarn over, and close off our puff stitch. Then we're going to chain 3, and we're going to slip stitch into the top loop there of our puff stitch. We'll chain 3 again, and we're going to slip stitch into the top of that DC we worked our puff stitch into to finish our puff stitch picket here. Then working down the other side, we'll add 10 more DC again. So 1 DC into the chain space, another into the DC, 2 into the chain space, 1 into the top of the DC, 2 into the chain space, 1 into the top of the next DC, 1 into the chain space, 1 into the top of the next DC. Then we are going to slip stitch into the top of the slip stitch from the previous row there, and repeat. So we'll skip the chain space, DC into the top of the DC, DC into the chain space, DC into the top of the DC, 2 DC into the chain space, DC into the top of the DC, 2 DC into the chain space, DC into the top of the DC, DC into the chain space. Then we'll add a DC into the top of the treble, and then add our puff stitch picket into the top of that DC by chaining 3, adding a long loop, so yarn over, pull up a long loop 3 times, yarn over, pull through all loops on hook, yarn over and close off of your puff stitch, chain 3, this is the picket part, insert into that loop you made at the top of your puff stitch and slip stitch, chain 3, and then slip stitch into the top of the DC you worked that puff stitch into, and then down the other side we'll DC into the chain space, add a DC into the top of the DC, 2 DC into the chain space, DC into the top of the DC, 2 DC into the chain space, DC into the top of the DC, DC into the chain space, DC into the top of the DC, then we'll skip our final chain space and slip stitch into the slip stitch from the previous row. And then we will repeat this for the last few points you have, and then you can fasten off. That will be the finish of our first sleeve. Alright, once you slip stitch into that final stitch you started from, you can fasten off, and this is what the end of your sleeve should look like. Should have little pickets, puff stitch pickets at the end of each point. It's super dainty and cute. Alright, moving on to the next sleeve. So what we are going to do is go back to that chest area that we kind of left unfinished. We're going to count our remaining chain spaces we have all the way around. Okay, so don't count the ones that we worked into. Start on the next one. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 22 total. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that number, 22, and subtract the 8 chain spaces that we need to work into to make our second sleeve. So if you remember, I chose 8 chain spaces. You might have chose a different number. So remember, or go back and count how many chain spaces you worked into to start your first sleeve. We're going to subtract that from the leftover chain spaces you have. So for me, 22 minus 8 is 14 chain spaces. So those 14 chain spaces, I need to split between the front and the back of my chest coverage. So I'm going to do 7 chain spaces in the front, 7 chain spaces in the back. If you have an uneven number, it's totally okay. Like say if I had 15 chain spaces left over, I could do 7 in the front and 8 in the back. You probably want to have more chain spaces in the back if you're going to have an uneven number, since generally your back is like wider than your chest area. So I have 7 chain spaces I'm going to leave over in the back or the front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to kind of where I ended the first row of my first sleeve, and I'm going to count 7 chain spaces. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm going to start my second sleeve in this next chain space here. And if you want, you can pull up your yarn in the 4th loop. That way it's not sliding along the loop there where you start. And we're going to start the same way and do everything exactly the same as we did for the other sleeve. So if you remember, we started with a chain 7, and slip stitched into the next stitch. And remember, we're working into 8 or however many chain spaces you worked into for the first sleeve. I'm not going to do it all over again on video, just because that makes my video really long. So go ahead and go back to where we started the other sleeve and do it all exactly the same as you did for the first sleeve. And once you have finished that, I will show you what mine looks like here, and I'll show you how to finish your whole project. Okay, so I finished my second sleeve. This is what the ends of the 2 sleeves look like. And now we just need to finish. So what needs to be finished is, as you can see, this is kind of sloppy looking with just the empty chains left across the chest area. So what we're gonna do is, working from that first sleeve we made, we're going to make an FDC chain, or a chain across the bottom here, and I will show you how we do that. So we're going to pull up our yarn and the second chain of it's actually this second row of our first sleeve. We're going to pull up our yarn in the second chain there. So you can kind of see it's not too far from where we ended our first row of our first sleeve. And then we are going to DC into the same chain space that we ended our first row of our first sleeve in. So we'll DC into that same chain space. And then we're going to start our foundation double crochet from the same chain space. So if you don't like foundation double crochet, kind of listen to this whole next part and then just do chains across and DC across the other side. But listen to the whole thing first so you know how many chains to do. So starting our first FDC from the same chain space, we'll insert, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 1 to start our first FDC, and then yarn over and pull through 2 twice, and that'll be our first FDC. So we'll do a total of 4 FDC now. And then we are going to do an FDC connect, just the bottom only, to the next chain space. So how we do that is we yarn over, pull up our loop for the foundation double crochet, insert our hook into the next chain space, pull up a loop and pull that loop through just 1 loop on our hook, yarn over and pull through 2 twice. So our foundation double crochet is connected, just the bottom to the next chain space. Then we're going to do 4 foundation double crochets again. And then again, we'll foundation double crochet, connect the bottom only into the next chain space. And then we'll continue on with another 4 foundation double crochet. And then connect our bottom of the 5th one to the next chain space. So we'll continue to do this all the way across, and then I'll show you how to finish and connect to the other side. Alright, once we worked all the way across and we did our FDC connect to that last chain space, we started our 2nd row in. What we're gonna do is we are going to work, so there should be like a treble crochet here. We're just gonna work under 2 loops, about 2 chains up if we could count them, like so, and slip stitch. And then we can fasten off here. And then we're gonna do the same exact thing for the other side. So you can flip your whole work over. And same thing for the other side, but we're gonna be working at the end of our 2nd sleeve made. We'll work into that 2nd chain of the 2nd row of our 2nd sleeve, pull up our loop, and then DC into the same stitch there, and then we can work our way across with 4 FDC connect to finish it off. And after that, you can weave in ends, and you are all done with your sleeves. I made a little tiny shrug. So I hope you enjoyed this. Remember that this is a PDF pattern as well, available on my Etsy and Shopify shops. So go ahead and go grab it if you need a little bit more direction. But otherwise, thank you for being here. Please make sure to like, comment, follow, subscribe, so that way I know that you guys are enjoying these videos and I can make more in the future. Thank you so much for being here. Remember, I also recently released the video tutorial for the element skirt that matches this, so make sure to make both so that we got the cutest matching set. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you guys so much.